Law enforcement of Reddit. What was the most scary paranormal call you have responded to? Serious. About 4 years ago, a lady who I'll call Lucy called our non-emergency line and said she locked herself out of her house. I responded to take the report in case FD needed to force entry. I arrived first and immediately noticed a burning candle and some Jesus-y statues in the upstairs window. The light in this room was also on. I can't explain it, but it seemed a bit odd to me. Anyways, I approached Lucy, who appeared to be about 65 years old, and asked what happened. She said she walked to her car to get groceries for her and her mother, but forgot her keys inside and the door had locked behind her. I asked if her mother was home and Lucy replied in the affirmative. Lucy went on to say she technically lived alone because her mom died 6 years prior, but she still lives with her in the bedroom with the lit candle and makes her presence known by turning on/off lights, opening/closing doors, and turning on the bathroom faucet. I then walked the perimeter of the home and found an unlocked window into the kitchen. Since Lucy never actually left home and knew no one else was inside, I radioed dispatch and climbed in through the window with her consent. As my boot touched the kitchen floor, I heard an audible click. At the same time, the lights in the stairway and upstairs hallway to my left turned off. I quickly walked to the rear sliding door to my right and advised Lucy what had happened. Lucy laughed and said that was just her mom saying hello. I told Lucy that although I genuinely believe what she told me was true, I still had to do my due diligence and ensure no one else was inside. I radioed for a back and within minutes, my buddy arrived. The first thing he asked about was the lit candle in the window. While clearing the upstairs, we came upon the room where the candle was and immediately noticed it was blown out. There were no open windows, fans, vents, or other obvious source that could have extinguished the flame. We just looked at each other with a bit of unease and went back downstairs to leave. Click, the upstairs lights turned off behind us. We talked to Lucy for another 5 minutes and suggested getting a battery-operated candle just to be safe. Well, Lucy clearly thought, flee the police, because to this day, that candle burns in the open window most nights when I drive by. And every now and then, I'll stop and talk to Lucy to see how she and her mother are doing. A few weeks ago, I'd gotten dispatched to a 911 call that involved a female frantically screaming at the dispatcher, "She's going to end me, she's going to end me. Come quick, I'm at," address of where she was at. Naturally, every unit within range of my sector and myself had radioed in a response, and we were all hauling our butt to get there. Once we got there, we discovered the house was abandoned for some years now, and so we set a cordon around with officers watching all exits as my shift partner, myself and a female officer announced ourselves and made entry into the residence. We cleared all of the first floor and proceeded to the second, and as soon as we got to the top of the stairs, a slight movement spooked us, and me and my partner immediately raised our weapons into a room where there was only a noose. Both he and I thought we saw a body on it at first glance. There was nothing there. We cleared the rest of the second floor and took a closer look at the noose, some dried up red, and what I think was peeled off skin on it from an earlier self-ending that occurred over a dozen years ago. We thought it might have been recent, but we didn't know at the time. Anyways, immediately after we cleared the house, we determined that it was way too dead, for lack of a better word, to have been used recently. However, we called in some detectives. But before we all stepped out, we all agreed we didn't see what just happened. Reason why is, my service has a policy on what could be constituted as paranormal instances, where the second something like that happens, you are immediately suspended from duty and given your badge, your gun, your duty belt and your vest. Before being taken on the spot to a psychiatrist/psychologist for a full comprehensive evaluation. Needless to say, I immediately called my supervisor at the end of shift and told him about it and did the right thing by going in for evaluation. Something to be said about integrity. I've driven past that house multiple times in the past weeks, and I've always sunk deeper into my seat as I've driven past. Something about it, it's like you could actually feel there was something off about it. City seems to agree with me. As of 3 days ago, the house is the #1 demolition priority in my sector and will be down by the end of the month. I'm just not happy that I'm going to have to go back inside next week to collect anything that might be of interest to both the city and my superiors. Luckily, I won't be going in alone. Also, the female who called in the 911 call was charged for public mischief under the pretext of misuse of 911 and misleading peace officers. Military policeman in the Marine Corps. While stationed at Camp Lejeune, A dispatcher got a call from a terrified wife that kids were trying to get into her house. It was a little after midnight. We thought this was just a drunken spouse call and responded not on high alert. Just kind of wanted to make sure the lady was all right. We knock on the door and announce ourselves. The woman is obviously shaken still with puffy eyes. She tells us 4 children with red eyes rang her doorbell and asked to come inside, and when she refused, they got angry. The kids terrorized her for 5 minutes. Her own child was put to bed and her husband was deployed. I decide to do a once-over of the whole housing property, and it was a whole lot of nothing going on. My partner and I decide to do a little walking patrol of that housing area. In each housing area, there's usually a decent-sized playground. As we were walking up to it, we both see some kids swinging. Curfew is 8 p.m. for young children, unless accompanied by an adult on base. I'm fleabing spooked at this point, and I know my partner is too. They look over at us and just stare. We started backtracking and then turned and didn't look back. Didn't talk about it the rest of the night either. Later on, I looked up the incident online, since Lejeune is famous for lots of paranormal activity, and turns out, the little red-eyed kids have been reported before. Late evening, maybe a decade ago, I ended up running silent to a call with additional units in tow. The caller reported hearing footsteps on her second floor when she was in the kitchen. She lived alone, middle-aged, divorced, no kids, and had no expected company. She is outside across the street when we arrive, obviously unnerved and being calmed by her neighbor. Other units showed up almost as I did and set up a perimeter at the corners of the property. We talk with her, get permission to enter, so we decide we'll announce ourselves and clear the house. 3 of us stack up on the front door, announce and make entry, while the other officers are viewing the windows from a distance under concealment. She was in the midst of making a really late dinner, so the house smells really good. I remember how good it smelled. Anyway, we clear the ground level and make our way to the stairs when we hear it. Obviously footsteps on the wood floors above us. Not a panicky, oh snap, I caught footsteps and running to hide or escape. No, these were calm, methodic and almost pace-like. We announce ourselves again and no response, except the pacing just starts to sort of fade away. Quietly, I make my way up the steps, adrenaline pumping, and concentrating on pieing the corner at the top. I stop a few stairs shy of the corner, breathe, and proceed up. The hallway at the top was pitch black, and after successfully clearing the top corner, we make our way down the hallway clearing rooms. Nothing. Nobody. Not even a critter. Not that any critter would ever make what I describe as human footsteps on hardwood. After the initial search, a few of the other officers involved also checked every nook and cranny, bed, closet, rack, heck, even the washer, dryer, appliances and cupboards were thoroughly searched. Nothing was out of order. Nobody was hiding anywhere. Eventually we invite the lady back into her residence and reassure her that there was nobody in there, and we equated her noise to maybe wood shrinkage or expansion in the home. None of the officers outside and after our initial search had seen anybody leave the top or bottom floors or windows. The house had no indications that anybody tried to force open a window or door. I stayed behind for about 30 minutes once the other officers cleared the call and waited while her friend showed up to stay the night with her. I went over basic security measures with her and double-checked all her windows and doors were not compromised. She fed me well-done lasagna as I waited, and to this day, I'm convinced that I interacted with another dimension of life that day. I am a police officer working on an emergency response team on a busy London borough. We took a call to a suspected domestic incident in a block of flats. The informant said that she could hear screaming and sounds of disturbance coming from the flat above her own. Once we arrived, my colleague and I knocked on the door of the flat the informant said the noise was coming from. I had heard nothing on my way up and certainly couldn't hear any disturbance coming from the address. To be honest, I heard nothing at all. After knocking twice, we had no response. My colleague left me to go downstairs and speak directly to the informant. I stayed by the door. I knocked again and after some time, it was answered by an elderly woman. She had clearly been asleep and was alarmed to see me standing outside. I told her that someone had called saying that they could hear a disturbance coming from within her address. I asked her if there was anyone else inside with her. She looked bemused and told me that she lived alone and had been sleeping. I asked her if I could come in to satisfy myself that no one else was there. She invited me in, and I walked into what was a small 2-bedroom flat. The flat was in darkness apart from her hall light and her bedside lamp. I began searching through the flat. As I approached the final door, the living room, my colleague called me up on the radio. He told me that he was on his way and asked if I was okay. I told him everything was fine, wondering why he sounded so flustered. He told me that he was with the informant and could also hear screaming and loud thuds coming from the flat I was in. I told him that he must be mistaken as I was almost done searching the flat and that I had heard nothing whatsoever. I have to admit a feeling of unease as I opened the final door. Like all the other rooms, it was in darkness but was freezing cold. My breath misted immediately. There was no one in the room and no signs of disturbance. No window was open. I called my colleague and asked him to listen out for my footfall. He said he could hear my feet as I stamped them, but said that the screaming had stopped. This coincided with me opening the door. I left shortly after, apologizing to the elderly woman for waking her. I have no rational explanation for this at all. My colleague and I left feeling very creeped out. Had a couple of weird things occur one night. Was working night shift in a small town and received a call to the hospital. The call was from the lone security guard on site who didn't feel comfortable dealing with this on his own. The call was dispatched as urgent assistance. On arrival to the hospital, the guard stated to me that the nursing staff had heard what they referred to as bee-curdling screams coming out of the then closed psychiatric unit. There were no patients or staff in the unit at the time. The door to the unit was a clear glass door and there was nothing visible on the other side. I requested the keys to unlock the door. After turning the key in the door and unlocking the deadbolt, before I was able to remove the keys from the door, something had forced the lock and re-locked the door, resulting in my hand, still holding the key, to be physically moved as well. I was pretty creeped out myself, but based on the severity of the call, I still entered the room and conducted a search of the entire unit with no result. Immediately after clearing the unit, another call came in, but this time, it was from a nurse walking to her car on the street. She also heard loud screams. I ran down to the hospital parking lot where another unit met me and we searched the area. I then came across a small park and could hear a very faint squeaking sound. I followed the sound only to come across a swing set of 4 swings. 3 swings were absolutely still as there was no wind, and the other was moving almost as there was someone still sitting in it and pumping to gain momentum. I stood there in awe for a good 30 seconds, and the swing did not lose any momentum. What a weird night. 3 years ago, I was called into an investigation of a burglary in a cemetery. When the forensics guys and I finally went out there, it was a slow morning. None of the responding deputies had actually gone inside yet. 4 deputies and a sergeant were busy securing the scene from the outside because it was still dark out and they didn't want to go into the dark mausoleum that had been broken into. Apparently, they felt much safer with us overweight non-sworn employees around, so we went inside together. The exterior door to the mausoleum had been forced open, and we started looking around for signs of anything stolen or vandalized. Eventually, we did find that one of the grave sites in the mausoleum, almost 15 feet off the ground, had the cement plaque shattered, and the coffin was pulled out and left sprawling on the floor. All contents of the coffin were missing, which including the cremated remains of 3 people, the last one who died in 2004. A person would have had to bring their own ladder to pull this out or been at least 12 to 13 feet tall. According to the forensics guy, it looked like the plaque for the coffin had been shattered from the inside due to water damage. Still, it seems oddly coincidental that a plaque would simultaneously break on the night of a break-in to the mausoleum. It hadn't been accessed since 2004, so almost 12 years prior. The people in the grave site had a single living relative. I called them, exchanged pleasantries, and then when I asked about the mausoleum they said, no habla English and hung up. It's probably Calaxian related somehow, but this is exactly the kind of thing that would happen at the start of a vampire or zombie apocalypse movie.